The crash cart alarm screamed through the trauma bay at 0347 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, a Marine who'd led 300 combat missions and buried 17 of his own men, was dying on table 4. And he was fighting every doctor, every nurse, every hand that tried to save him. "Get your hands off me." His voice was raw, dangerous. "I don't need your help. I don't want your help." The ER staff exchanged helpless glances. They'd sedated him twice. Both times, he'd ripped out his IV and nearly thrown a resident through the curtain. But in the corner of the trauma bay, a quiet nurse with tired eyes and steady hands was rolling up her sleeve. She'd seen that look before in the mirror, every morning for 3 years. What happened next would change everything Marcus Webb thought he knew about survival. Grace Moreno had a ritual. Every morning at 4:45 a.m., before the San Diego sun crept over the hills behind Naval Medical Center, she'd sit in her 2018 Honda Civic in the parking garage and close her eyes. 3 deep breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Then she'd touch the small tattoo on the inside of her right forearm, a winged skull with crossed bones and the number 75 beneath it. Ranger tab. 75th Ranger Regiment. Most people who saw it assumed it belonged to a boyfriend, a brother, a husband. Nobody expected the quiet, 5'4" Filipina nurse with the gentle smile to have spent 4 years as a combat medic in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. That was the way Grace preferred it. She grabbed her coffee from the cup holder black, no sugar, the way she'd learned to drink it in Afghanistan when anything else was a luxury, and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, hair already escaping from her ponytail. 34 years old, and she looked 40 on a good day. But her hands were steady. They'd been steady in Kandahar when the mortar rounds fell like rain. They'd been steady in Mosul when she'd held a 19-year-old private's intestines inside his body for 43 minutes until the medevac arrived. They were steady now. That's what mattered. The emergency department at Naval Medical Center San Diego never truly slept, but there was a rhythm to it. Grace knew that rhythm better than she knew her own heartbeat. The quiet lull around 3 a.m. when even the drunks had found their beds. The surge at shift change. The predictable chaos of Friday nights when young sailors made young decisions. She pushed through the staff entrance, nodding to the security guard Mike, retired Marine, 2 grandkids in Virginia, and made her way to the nurse's station. Moreno, Janet Chen, the night shift charge nurse, looked up from her computer with relief in her eyes. Thank God. It's been a night. Motorcycle versus semi on the 5. 3 GSWs from something that went down in National City. And we've got a VIP transfer coming in from Camp Pendleton in about an hour. Some Marine brass with internal bleeding. Command is calling every 15 minutes. Grace raised an eyebrow. In her 8 years at Naval Medical, she'd learned that VIP usually meant pain in the ass. Rank didn't make people easier to treat, it usually made them harder. "I'll take the GSWs," she said, reaching for her assignment tablet. "You sure? The VIP's going to need experienced hands." Grace thought about it for half a second. She'd spent the last decade running toward the hard cases, the ones nobody else wanted. It was the only thing that made her feel useful anymore, the only thing that kept the memories at bay. "Fine, I'll take the VIP too." Janet's shoulders dropped with relief. "You're a lifesaver. Literally." Grace allowed herself a small smile. That's the job. She spent the next hour moving through the department like water, checking vitals on the GSW patients, consulting with the trauma surgeon, restocking the crash carts. It was work that required focus, precision, the kind of constant attention that left no room for the past to creep in. At 3:22 a.m., her pager buzzed. VIP. Incoming. Ada, 8 minutes. Trauma Bay 4. Grace made her way to the Trauma Bay, mentally reviewing the intake report. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, 47 years old, 25 years in the Marine Corps, 3 Purple Hearts, multiple deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and locations that were still classified. Currently bleeding internally from what appeared to be a ruptured spleen, sustained in a training accident that the report was suspiciously vague about. She'd seen that kind of vagueness before. It usually meant something nobody wanted to talk about. The ambulance bay doors burst open, and Grace's world tilted sideways. The man on the gurney was a mountain of muscle and barely contained fury, even pale from blood loss. Even with an oxygen mask strapped to his face and IV lines snaking from both arms, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb radiated danger. His gray eyes, sharp, intelligent, seething, swept the trauma bay like he was assessing a combat zone. "Where the hell is my phone?" His voice was a growl. "I need to call my XO. Sir, you're in critical condition." Dr. Patel, the trauma surgeon, tried to sound calm. "We need to prep you for emergency surgery. You have internal bleeding that I've had internal bleeding before." Webb sat up, and 2 nurses jumped back. "I've walked 3 miles with internal bleeding. I don't need surgery. I need my goddamn phone." Grace watched from the doorway, reading the room the way she'd learned to read hostile terrain. The other nurses were scared. She could see it in their body language, the way they angled themselves toward the exit. "Doctor." Patel was frustrated and rapidly losing control of the situation. But what Grace saw in Marcus Webb's eyes wasn't arrogance. It wasn't the entitlement of a man used to giving orders. It was terror. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of soldiers who'd been so strong for so long that they'd forgotten how to be anything else. Men who'd been responsible for keeping everyone else alive until the weight of it had crushed something inside them. Men who couldn't let anyone see them weak. "Sir." Grace stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Nurse Moreno. I'm going to be taking care of you tonight." Webb's eyes locked onto hers, assessing, measuring, finding her wanting. "I don't need taking care of," he said. "What I need is for everyone to stop treating me like I'm dying and let me do my job. With respect, sir, if we don't operate within the next hour, you will die." Grace kept her gaze steady. "Your spleen is ruptured. You're bleeding into your abdominal cavity. No amount of willpower is going to change that." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, that she'd spoken to him directly. Then the walls came back up. "Harder than before. I've survived worse. I'm sure you have. But this isn't Afghanistan. This isn't combat. This is your body failing, and the enemy is time." She paused. "Let us help you." For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something crack in his expression. Then his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The grip was iron, painful. The grip of a man who'd spent decades learning how to hurt people. "I said," he growled, "I don't need your help." The room went silent. Security was already moving toward them. Dr. Patel had his hand on the sedation tray, but Grace didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She'd been in this position before, not with patients, but with enemies, with men who wanted to see her, afraid. She wasn't afraid. "Okay," she said quietly. "Then I won't help you. I'll just stay here." Webb's grip loosened slightly, confusion crossing his face. "What?" "I'm going to stand right here, by your side, and I'm not going to do anything unless you ask me to. But I'm not leaving either." She met his eyes. "You can push everyone else away. You can fight this whole hospital. But I'm not going anywhere, Colonel. Not until you're safe." The silence stretched for what felt like an hour. Then Webb's hand released her wrist. He sagged back against the gurney, suddenly looking every one of his 47 years. "Fine," he muttered. "Stay if you want. But I'm not doing surgery." Grace nodded, pulling up a stool. "Then we wait." It was a gamble. She knew it. Every minute they delayed increased the risk of catastrophic hemorrhage. But she'd learned something in all her years of treating the broken. You couldn't force someone to accept help. You could only be there when they were ready. The next 20 minutes were the longest of her career. She watched Webb's vitals on the monitor, his blood pressure dropping, point by point, his heart rate climbing as his body tried to compensate for the blood pooling in his abdomen, his skin going from pale to waxy. He was dying in front of her, and he knew it. And still, he wouldn't break. "Your army." His voice was weaker now, almost conversational. "I can tell." "Was," Grace said. 8 years, 68 whiskey, combat medic, a grunt, almost approving. "Where'd you serve?" "Kandahar, Mosul." A few places I'm not supposed to talk about. Another grunt. His eyes were starting to drift. Blood loss making him loopy. You know what the hardest part is? He wasn't really talking to her anymore. It's not the fighting. It's not the dying. It's coming home and pretending like you're okay. Like you're the same person you were before. Grace felt something twist in her chest. I know. No, you don't. His voice was bitter. Nobody knows. They look at the medals and the rank and they think they understand. But they don't see the faces. The ones you couldn't save. The ones who trusted you to bring them home. His monitors started alarming. Blood pressure dropping into dangerous territory. Colonel, I lost 4 men last month. The words came out in a rush, like they'd been dammed up for too long. Training exercise. Some idiot didn't check his equipment, and 3 Marines went into the ocean. I went in after them. Got 2 out. 2 more drowned while I was swimming. That's how you ruptured your spleen. Doesn't matter how. What matters is I failed. Again. His eyes were wet now, and Grace knew that was the blood loss talking as much as the emotions. Men like Marcus Webb didn't cry, not unless their bodies forced them to. I've been failing for 25 years, he whispered, and I'm so tired of fighting. Grace reached out and took his hand. Then stop fighting, she said. Just for tonight. Let someone else carry the weight. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Grace stayed through all of it, standing in the observation gallery above the OR, even though her shift had ended 2 hours ago. She watched Dr. Patel's steady hands navigate the damage, the ruptured spleen, the internal bleeding that had been far worse than the initial scans showed. 3 times, Marcus Webb's heart stopped on the table. 3 times, they brought him back. By the time they moved him to the ICU, the sun was rising over San Diego Bay, painting the hospital windows gold. Grace should have gone home, should have crawled into her bed in the little apartment she'd been renting for 6 years, the one with the bare walls and the mattress on the floor, because she'd never gotten around to buying real furniture. Instead, she found herself in the ICU waiting room, drinking her 4th cup of terrible coffee and watching the door to Webb's room. You know him? Grace looked up. A young Marine in dress blues was standing over her, his face a mask of barely contained worry. The nameplate on his chest read, Torres. I'm his nurse, she said. Well, one of them. Staff Sergeant Torres. I'm Colonel Webb's driver. He sat down heavily in the chair across from her. Is he going to make it? The surgery went well, but the next 48 hours are critical. Torres nodded, staring at his hands. He saved my life. 2 years ago, in Syria. Our convoy got hit and I was pinned under burning wreckage. Colonel Webb pulled me out with his bare hands. Burned himself pretty bad doing it. That sounds like him. He's a good man. Torres's voice cracked slightly. The best commander I ever served under. But he doesn't know how to stop. Doesn't know how to let anyone take care of him. Grace thought about the grip on her wrist. The terror in Webb's eyes. I noticed. His wife left him last year. Said she couldn't compete with the Corps anymore. His kids barely talk to him. Torres shook his head. He's got nothing except the mission. And now the mission almost killed him. It wasn't the mission. Torres looked up. Something fierce in his eyes. It was him. He's been pushing himself harder and harder since the divorce, taking every dangerous assignment, volunteering for every deployment. It's like he's trying to prove something. Or punish himself. Grace felt that twist in her chest again, the recognition of a pattern she knew all too well. You should get some rest, Staff Sergeant. It might be a while before he wakes up. Torres stood, but hesitated. You'll stay with him? Make sure he's not alone? I'll stay. After he left, Grace made her way to Webb's room. He was unconscious, intubated, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed in a rhythm she knew by heart. The fierce warrior from the trauma bay was gone, replaced by a man who looked small and fragile under the harsh hospital lights. She pulled up a chair and sat beside his bed. I know you can't hear me, she said quietly, but I'm going to talk anyway, because I think you need someone to say the things no one ever said to me. She took a breath. I know what it's like to carry the dead, to see their faces every time you close your eyes, to feel like every breath you take is borrowed time that should have belonged to someone else. Outside the window, the city was waking up. Cars moving on the freeway. People going about their ordinary lives, unaware of the battles being fought in this quiet room. I lost 7 men in Kandahar, 7 soldiers who trusted me to keep them alive, and I failed. Mortar attack. I was the only medic, and there were too many wounded, and I had to choose who to save. Her voice caught. I had to choose who was going to die. She'd never told anyone this. Not her therapist, not her fellow nurses, not the VA counselors who'd tried so hard to help her transition back to civilian life. I came home, and I couldn't function. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop seeing their faces. She looked at the tattoo on her arm. I tried to kill myself 3 times. Pills, mostly. Once I got as far as buying a gun. The monitor beside her beeped steadily. Life, persisting despite everything. You know what saved me? It wasn't therapy. It wasn't medication. It was a nurse in a VA hospital who saw me, really saw me, and refused to let me disappear. She sat with me through the worst nights. She didn't try to fix me. She just stayed. Grace reached out and touched Webb's hand. His skin was cool, papery. So I'm going to stay with you, Colonel. Not because it's my job, because I know what it's like to be drowning and too proud to ask for a lifeline. She settled back in her chair and watched the sun climb higher in the sky. When you wake up, we're going to have a conversation, and you're not going to like it, but you're going to listen. Because I didn't survive everything, I survived just to watch another soldier destroy himself on my watch. Marcus Webb opened his eyes on the 3rd day. Grace was there when it happened, as she'd been there for most of the past 72 hours. She'd gone home to shower and change twice, grabbing a few hours of sleep each time, but something kept pulling her back to that ICU room. The hospital administrators had given up trying to send her home. The other nurses had started calling her Webb's guardian angel, though they meant it sarcastically. Let them talk. She'd been called worse. When his eyes fluttered open, the first thing he saw was her face. You. His voice was a rasp, raw from the intubation tube they'd removed the day before. You're still here. I told you I wasn't going anywhere. He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows. For a moment, the old fury flickered in his eyes, the frustration of a man who hated being helpless. Then it faded, replaced by something Grace hadn't seen before. Exhaustion. Real, bone-deep exhaustion. Why? He asked. Why what? Why do you care? I'm just another patient, another body on a gurney. Grace considered the question. She'd been asking herself the same thing for 3 days. Because I see you, she said finally. Not the rank, not the medals. You. And what do you see? A man who's been strong for so long he's forgotten that strength isn't the same as survival. She leaned forward. A man who's carrying so much weight that he'd rather die than set it down. Webb was quiet for a long moment. His hand moved to his abdomen, touching the bandages where they'd cut him open to save his life. Staff Sergeant Torres told me what happened, Grace continued. The training accident. The men you lost. Torres talks too much. He loves you. They all do, your Marines. Do you know they've had a rotating vigil in the waiting room for 3 days? 20, 30 guys at a time, waiting to hear if their commander is going to live? Something flickered across Webb's face. Surprise. Maybe even shame. They shouldn't be here. They have duties. They're here because you're their duty, because you've bled for them, and now they want to be here while you heal. Grace paused. That's not weakness, Colonel. That's family. I don't have family. The words were bitter. Not anymore. You have those Marines. You have Torres. And whether you like it or not, you have me. Webb turned his head to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since he'd arrived. What's your story, Nurse Moreno? Why is a Ranger combat medic working the night shift at a Navy hospital? Grace had known this question was coming. She'd prepared for it, even. She still wasn't ready. I told you while you were unconscious, she said. But I'll tell you again. And she did. All of it. The mortar attack in Kandahar. The 7 men she'd lost. The choices she'd had to make. The faces that haunted her. the suicide attempts, the long, slow climb back to something resembling a life. When she finished, Webb was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. "You stayed with me for 3 days," he said slowly, "because you saw yourself in me. I stayed because I know that the darkness doesn't win unless you let it, and I wasn't going to let it win again." Webb was silent for a long time. The monitors beeped. Outside, life went on. Finally, he spoke. "My wife, ex-wife, she used to say I was the bravest man she knew. But she was wrong. I'm not brave. I'm terrified." His voice cracked. "Every single day, I'm terrified that if I stop moving, if I stop fighting, everything I've been running from will catch up, and I don't know if I can face it." Grace reached out and took his hand again. This time, he didn't pull away. "You don't have to face it alone. I don't know how to do this, how to let people in. Neither did I. But I learned. And if I could learn, Colonel, so can you." She rolled up her sleeve, showing him the Ranger tab tattoo. "We're the same, you and me. Broken warriors who forgot that healing is part of the mission too." She met his eyes. "Let me help you. Not because it's my job, because it's what we do. We don't leave anyone behind." For the first time since she'd met him, Marcus Webb smiled. It was small, tired, but real. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Recovery, Grace had learned, wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral, sometimes climbing, sometimes plunging, always circling back to the same dark places before finally breaking free. Over the next 2 weeks, she watched Marcus Webb fight the hardest battle of his life. The physical recovery was brutal. The surgeons had removed his spleen entirely, leaving him immunocompromised and exhausted. Physical therapy pushed him to his limits every day, and Grace saw the frustration building behind his eyes as his body refused to obey the way it once had. But it was the other recovery, the invisible one, that proved to be the real war. She started coming to his room every evening after her shift, bringing contraband coffee from the good machine in the administration building, and sitting with him while the sun set over the harbor. At first, they talked about nothing. Sports, movies, the terrible hospital food. Slowly, carefully, the walls came down. "I was 19 when I enlisted," Webb told her one night. "My dad was a Marine. His dad was a Marine. It was never a question of whether I'd serve, just how long before I did. Did you want to? I wanted to be anywhere but where I was. Small town in Virginia, dead-end job, girlfriend who was already looking at other guys." He shrugged. "The Corps gave me purpose, made me someone. And when did it become everything?" Webb was quiet for a moment. "My first deployment. Iraq, 2004. I lost my best friend in Fallujah, kid named Tommy Rodriguez. We'd been together since boot camp. I'm sorry. After that, I made myself a promise. I'd be the best officer I could be. I'd bring everyone home. I'd never lose another man if I could help it." His jaw tightened. "I broke that promise 17 times. You remember everyone, every name, every face, every letter I wrote to their families." He looked at her. "Do you?" "Yes." Grace didn't hesitate. "Michael Torres, David Kim, James Washington, Brandon Peters, Anthony Ruiz, Christopher Morales, Samuel Jackson." She recited the names like a prayer. "I remember. Does it ever get easier?" "No. But it gets different. The weight doesn't disappear. You just get stronger at carrying it." As the days passed, Grace watched the change happening. It was subtle at first, a softness in Webb's eyes when he talked to his nurses, a patience he hadn't shown before. He started meeting with the hospital chaplain, something he'd refused to do for the first week. Started writing letters to his children, trying to explain things he'd never had the words for before. And then came the day that changed everything. Grace was finishing her shift when Torres found her in the hallway, his face tight with worry. "Something's wrong with the colonel," he said. "He won't talk to anyone, won't eat, just sits there staring at the wall." She found Webb in his room, exactly as Torres had described. The blinds were closed, the TV was off. He was sitting in his bed, completely still, his eyes fixed on nothing. Grace recognized that stillness. She'd felt it herself. In the darkest moments. Marcus. She used his first name deliberately. Talk to me. I talked to my daughter today. His voice was flat, hollow. First time in 8 months. That's good. She said she doesn't want me at her graduation. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were empty. She said I missed too many moments already. Said having me there would just remind her of all the times I wasn't. Grace felt her heart crack. What did you say? What could I say? She's right. I chose the Corps over my family for 25 years. I told myself it was for them, the deployments, the missed birthdays, the empty chair at Thanksgiving. But it wasn't for them. It was for me. Because being a commander was easier than being a father. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had pulled Torres from burning wreckage, that had carried dying men to safety, that had written 17 letters to 17 families. I've saved so many lives, he whispered. So why couldn't I save the ones that mattered most? Grace sat down on the edge of his bed. You're still alive. That means you can still try. She doesn't want me to try. She made that clear. She's angry. She's hurt. But she's also your daughter, which means she's stubborn as hell. Grace managed a small smile. She gets that from you. And stubborn people, they don't give up on the people they love, even when they want to. How do you know? Because I pushed everyone away for years after Kandahar. My mother, my sisters, anyone who tried to love me. She took his hand. They waited. They're still waiting. And when I was finally ready to let them back in, they were there. Webb closed his eyes. I don't know how to be a different man. I've been this way for so long. Then don't be a different man. Be the same man, the one who never gives up, who never leaves anyone behind, just pointed in a new direction. She squeezed his hand. You spent 25 years fighting for strangers. Maybe it's time to fight for the people who need you most. When Webb opened his eyes again, something had shifted. The emptiness was still there, but underneath it was something else. Determination. Okay, he said. Let's figure out how. The day Marcus Webb was discharged from Naval Medical Center was supposed to be a quiet one. It was anything but. Grace had helped him pack his things that morning, a small bag of belongings that felt inadequate for a man who'd given a quarter-century to his country. He was pale, thinner than he'd been, but there was a steadiness in his eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. You've got my number, she said as she handed him his discharge papers. Use it. For medical emergencies. For anything. 3 in the morning when you can't sleep. When the darkness gets too close. When you just need someone to listen. She met his eyes. You're not alone anymore, Colonel. Don't forget that. He nodded, something unspoken passing between them. Then he reached for his uniform jacket, the one with the silver eagle insignia and the rows of ribbons that told the story of a lifetime of service, and stopped. Grace, thank you. For seeing me. For staying. She smiled. That's what we do. They walked together toward the hospital exit, where Torres was waiting with a car. The automatic doors slid open, and sunlight flooded the hallway. And then Grace saw them. Marines. Dozens of them. Maybe 100. They were lined up along the sidewalk, standing at attention in their dress blues, their faces solemn and proud. Officers and enlisted, young privates and grizzled sergeants, men and women who'd served under Marcus Webb at some point in his 25-year career. They'd come from all over California. Some had driven through the night. Some had taken emergency leave. All of them had come for one reason, to show their commander that he wasn't alone. Webb stopped in the doorway, his breath catching. What is this? His voice was barely a whisper. Torres stepped forward, his chin high. We heard you were getting out today, sir. We wanted to make sure you knew. We're not going anywhere. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, we're here. A senior officer, a general, Grace realized, stepped out of the formation. His nameplate read Harrison. His face was weathered. Kind. Marcus. He extended his hand. I served with your father, you know. He was the finest Marine I ever knew, until I met his son. Webb shook the general's hand, something breaking open in his face. General, you've given everything to the Corps, every ounce of yourself. and I know you've been carrying burdens that would have crushed lesser men." Harrison's voice was firm. "But carrying burdens alone isn't strength, Colonel. It's pride. And pride, as my grandmother used to say, is just another word for fear." He placed a hand on Webb's shoulder. "Let your people carry you for a while. That's an order." Webb's composure finally cracked. His eyes filled with tears, real tears, the kind he hadn't shed in decades, not in front of anyone. And then, from the back of the formation, a voice rang out. 10 hoot. 100 Marines snapped to attention as one. "Present arms." 100 hands rose in salute. Grace watched as Marcus Webb, the man who'd fought every offer of help, who'd nearly died rather than show weakness, stood in the California sunshine and wept while his people honored him. She felt tears on her own face, felt the weight of her own past pressing against her chest, felt, for the first time in years, like maybe the darkness didn't win, like maybe it never had to. Webb turned to look at her, his eyes bright and broken and somehow, impossibly, hopeful. "This is because of you," he said. "You showed me what it means to let people in." Grace shook her head. "This was always there. You just couldn't see it." She rolled up her sleeve, showing him the tattoo one more time. The winged skull, the crossed bones, the number that represented everything she'd been through. "Rangers lead the way," she said softly. "But nobody said we have to lead alone." Webb looked at the tattoo, then back at her face. And in that moment, something passed between them that was deeper than words. Two broken warriors who'd finally found their way home. 6 months later, Grace stood in the parking garage at Naval Medical Center, sipping her coffee and watching the sunrise. Same 2018 Honda Civic. Same black coffee, no sugar. Same ritual of 3 deep breaths before her shift. But everything else had changed. She touched the tattoo on her forearm, the way she did every morning. But this time, she didn't touch it to remember the dead. She touched it to remember that she was alive. Her phone buzzed. From Marcus. "Arrived in Virginia last night. Meeting Sarah for breakfast. Terrified, but doing it anyway. Thanks for kicking my ass." Grace smiled and typed back. "That's what friends are for. Tell me how it goes." From Marcus. "Will do. By the way, I submitted the paperwork. Official retirement as of next month. Time to be a civilian." She put the phone down and closed her eyes. It had been 6 months of hard work for both of them. Marcus had started therapy, real therapy, with a VA counselor who specialized in combat trauma. He'd written letters to his children, not expecting forgiveness, just trying to explain. His daughter hadn't responded at first. Then, she had. Then, they'd talked on the phone for 3 hours. He was still broken in some ways. Still woke up at 0300 hours with his heart racing and his sheets soaked with sweat. Still saw the faces of the men he'd lost when he closed his eyes. But he wasn't carrying it alone anymore, and neither was Grace. She'd started going to a support group for combat veterans, something she'd resisted for years. Started calling her sisters more often. Started decorating her apartment, buying actual furniture, putting pictures on the walls. Small things. Civilian things. Things that meant she was finally building a life, not just surviving one. The hospital doors opened, and Janet Chen emerged, squinting in the morning light. "Moreno, you're here early." "Old habits." Janet walked over, coffee in hand. "Heard we've got a VIP transfer coming in tonight. Some Army colonel from Fort Bragg." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Bad? Unknown. Could be medical. Could be mental health. They're being cagey about it." For a moment, Grace felt the old weight settle on her shoulders. Another broken warrior. Another soul drowning in the darkness. But this time, she didn't feel it as a burden. She felt it as a purpose. "I'll take it," she said. Janet smiled. "I figured you would." Grace finished her coffee and headed toward the staff entrance. Mike, the security guard, waved as she passed. A young corpsman she'd been mentoring called out a greeting. The familiar rhythm of the ER welcomed her like an old friend. She paused at the nurse's station, looking out the window at the harbor. The sun was fully up now, painting the water gold. Somewhere in Virginia, Marcus Webb was sitting down to breakfast with his daughter, trying to rebuild a bridge he'd spent 25 years burning. Somewhere in this hospital, a wounded soldier was waiting for someone to see them, really see them, and refuse to let them disappear. Grace touched her tattoo one last time. Then she grabbed her tablet and went to work. There's a moment in every battle when the tide turns. Not with a bang, but with a choice. A small, quiet decision that changes everything that comes after. For Marcus Webb, that moment came at 0347 hours in a trauma bay in San Diego, when a quiet nurse refused to leave his side. For Grace Moreno, it came 3 days later, sitting in an ICU room, finally speaking the truth she'd carried for years. What they discovered was something every warrior eventually learns, that the greatest strength isn't the ability to fight alone. It's the courage to let someone fight beside you. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes they're the ones who see past the armor, past the medals, past the walls we've built to keep the world out. Sometimes they're the ones who simply stay. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somewhere out there, a warrior is drowning in silence, convinced that asking for help means failure. Show them they're wrong. Show them they're not alone.